The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting a golden hue across the pristine marble countertops. The air was thick with the scent of freshly brewed tea, my only solace in this household. As I reached for my cup, a daily ritual I clung to for a shred of normalcy, something felt different. The ceramic was warm against my palm, yet beneath it, a small slip of paper peeked out. My brows knitted together as I pulled it free. "Hope you enjoy your last sip." The words, scrawled in uneven handwriting, sent a slow chill down my spine. My pulse quickened, but my face remained neutral. I had long learned that showing weakness in this house was akin to inviting disaster. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate breath and exhaled as if nothing had happened. If this was meant to shake me, it wouldn't. Not today. Every story has power, and so does your support. Subscribe for more gripping tales that inspire and captivate. It's free and helps us keep this community thriving. Now let's dive in. The clinking of dishes and muffled conversation filled the space around me. My mother-in-law sat across the table, eyes sharp as ever, watching my every move like a hawk circling its prey. Her presence was suffocating, a constant reminder that I was never truly welcome in this house, despite the ring on my finger. My sister-in-law, just as cruel but with a sharper tongue, sat beside her, scrolling through her phone with an air of disinterest. I turned the cup in my hands, my fingers tracing its rim, feigning contemplation. Then, with an unbothered smile, I gently set it down in front of my mother-in-law. "Why don't you have it today?" My voice was light, casual, as if offering a simple act of kindness. Her gaze flickered to mine, then to the cup. A flash of something, was it hesitation? Crossed her face before she scoffed. "Do I look like I need your pity?" Before I could respond, my sister-in-law snatched the cup with a smirk. "Please. If anyone deserves the first sip, it's me." My breath hitched for just a moment, but I masked it quickly. This wasn't part of the plan. I had expected my mother-in-law to react, to question, maybe even to refuse. But her daughter? She was impulsive, arrogant, and that would be her downfall. She raised the cup to her lips, the steam curling around her face, and took a slow, deliberate sip. I watched, waiting. My heart pounded in a rhythm I refused to acknowledge. The moment stretched, each second pressing against my chest like a weight. Then she paused. Her brows knitted together, her lips parting slightly as if tasting something unexpected. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, gone as quickly as it appeared. She set the cup down, her fingers tightening around the handle. "What is this?" Her voice carried an edge now, suspicion lacing her words. I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "What do you mean?" She stared at me as if searching for something beneath my composed exterior. My mother-in-law leaned forward, her sharp gaze darting between us. "Well, what's wrong with it?" "I don't know," my sister-in-law murmured, licking her lips as though trying to place the strange sensation. "It just tastes off." A slow smile curled at the edges of my lips. Subtle, unreadable. "Strange," I mused, reaching for the cup again. "Maybe I should try it." She jerked it away before I could, her grip tightening. "No." A quiet beat of silence passed between us. I saw it then, the uncertainty creeping into her features, the unspoken fear slipping beneath her bravado. The note had done its job. She was second-guessing herself. My mother-in-law, however, was less impressed. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped, reaching for the cup herself. "You're just being dramatic." But my sister-in-law hesitated, holding it just out of reach. Her eyes flicked to mine, searching. I gave her nothing. No confirmation, no denial. Just a quiet, knowing look. She swallowed hard. Then, in a sudden movement, she pushed the cup away, the contents sloshing slightly over the rim. "I don't want it anymore." I leaned back, my fingers tracing the edge of my plate, barely concealing my satisfaction. "What's the matter?" I asked, my voice soft, amused even. She scowled. "Nothing." But I knew better. The power dynamic had shifted. For the first time, there was hesitation in her actions, a crack in her unwavering arrogance. And that was all I needed. My mother-in-law let out an exasperated sigh, clearly unimpressed with her daughter's sudden paranoia. "Honestly, the both of you are unbearable," she muttered, reaching for her own tea instead. I watched as she took a slow sip, completely unaware of the invisible battle that had just taken place. The room settled again, conversation returning to mundane topics. But beneath the surface something had changed. A seed of doubt had been planted. And doubt was a powerful thing. I glanced down at the slip of paper still resting on my lap. This was just the beginning. The day passed as usual, or at least that's how it appeared. My sister-in-law avoided my gaze, her unease palpable. My mother-in-law remained her usual self, unbothered, arrogant, convinced that she still held all the power in this house. But I knew better. That evening, as I cleared the dining table, I noticed something. My sister-in-law's cup remained untouched since breakfast. She had switched to water, her tea abandoned. I smiled to myself. Fear is a funny thing. It doesn't need to be real. It just needs to be believable. As I rinsed the dishes, I felt a presence behind me. I didn't turn immediately. I let the silence stretch, waiting. Then her voice, low, uncertain. What was in it? I let the water run, my fingers tapping idly against the sink. Then finally I turned to face her. In what? I asked, feigning confusion. She glared at me, though the fear behind her eyes was evident. Don't play games. What was in it? I stepped closer, watching as she instinctively took a half step back. And then I smiled. I don't know what you're talking about. Her breath hitched, her fingers twitching at her sides. For the first time she had no words. And that, I realized, was more satisfying than anything else. As I turned off the sink and walked past her, I heard her shaky exhale behind me. He was afraid now. Good. Because this was only the first sip. As I walked away from my sister-in-law, leaving her trapped in the web of her own paranoia, a quiet satisfaction curled in my chest. She had always been the one to sneer, to humiliate, to dismiss me as nothing more than an outsider in this house. And yet, with nothing but a well-placed note and the power of suggestion, I had managed to turn the tables. The real beauty of it? I hadn't needed to lift a finger. By the time dinner rolled around, the energy in the house had shifted. It was subtle, just a ripple beneath the surface. But I felt it in the way my sister-in-law kept glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. In the way she reached for her glass of water instead of the steaming cup of tea set before her. My mother-in-law, oblivious to the unspoken battle between us, remained her usual self, imposing, critical, and entirely too convinced of her own importance. Are you seriously not drinking your tea? She asked, her voice sharp as she eyed her daughter. What nonsense is this now? My sister-in-law stiffened, her fingers tightening around her fork. For a second I wondered if she would say something, if she would dare voice the creeping suspicion gnawing at the edges of her mind. But she was smart enough to know that speaking up without proof would only invite ridicule. It's too hot, she muttered instead, pushing the cup further away. I almost laughed. She was unraveling faster than I'd expected. The rest of the meal was uneventful on the surface. But beneath it I could feel the tension simmering. My mother-in-law, growing increasingly impatient, directed most of her sharp remarks at me. My husband, silent as ever, ate without acknowledging my presence. He was a spectator in this house, never one to intervene, never one to question. And yet I caught him watching me tonight. It was a fleeting glance, barely noticeable, but it was there. After dinner I retreated to our bedroom, closing the door behind me with a quiet click. The night outside was calm, the kind of stillness that should have brought peace. But in this house, silence was never truly silent. It was filled with unsaid words, buried grudges, and ghosts of arguments long since past. As I changed into something more comfortable, the door creaked open behind me. I didn't turn immediately. I know you did something. My sister-in-law's voice was barely above a whisper, but the accusation in it was razor-sharp. I sighed, rubbing my temples before facing her. You sound paranoid. Her jaw clenched. You think you're clever, don't you? I tilted my head, studying her. Her confidence was fraying at the edges, her usual smugness replaced with unease. If I had done something, I said, voice deliberately slow, wouldn't you feel it by now? Her face paled just slightly. I took a step closer, watching as she tensed. The funny thing about fear, I continued, my voice soft but laced with something heavier, is that it doesn't need to be real. It just needs to feel real. Her breath hitched. For a second, just a second, I saw something I had never seen in her before. Doubt. She stormed out without another word. I exhaled, turning back to the mirror. The face staring back at me was calm, composed. But inside my mind was whirring. The pieces were shifting into place. My sister-in-law was the weakest link, and I had found the first crack in the foundation. Now all I had to do was widen it. The next morning I found my mother-in-law in the kitchen, her lips pressed into a thin line as she stared at the countertop. Something was wrong. I took a slow step forward, glancing at the table. And then I saw it. A single white cup. My cup. And beneath it, another note. My pulse remained steady, my expression unreadable. But inside something flickered. I didn't leave that note. I lifted the cup slowly, fingers steady despite the storm brewing beneath my skin. The note was shorter this time. Not everything is as it seems. The handwriting was different. Neater, more deliberate. I didn't react. I didn't let the question forming in my mind show on my face. Instead, I turned to my mother-in-law, feigning indifference. She was watching me closely, her eyes sharp. "Do you think this is funny?" she asked, voice laced with irritation. I raised a brow. "Why would I find this funny?" She scoffed, crossing her arms. "I don't have time for games. If you think you can—" I didn't leave this. I cut her off, my tone even. Her eyes narrowed. Silence stretched between us. Then from behind us my sister-in-law's voice rang out. I saw her do it. I turned slowly, meeting her gaze. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression set in forced confidence. I almost smiled. So this was her move. Lies were always the first resort of the desperate. My mother-in-law turned to me expectant. I met her gaze without flinching. "And what exactly did you see?" My sister-in-law's lips parted as if realizing too late that she hadn't thought this through. She hesitated. "I saw you put the note there." I tilted my head. "Did you?" She faltered. My mother-in-law, growing impatient, sighed. "I don't care who did what. I just wanted to stop." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because in that moment I saw it. My sister-in-law wasn't just afraid anymore. She was unraveling. I turned, walking away without another word. Let them stew in their own uncertainty. Because now the game had truly begun. Later that night I found another note. This one tucked beneath my pillow. I unfolded it slowly, my heartbeat steady. "Check your tea tomorrow morning." A shiver ran down my spine. Not out of fear. Out of anticipation. Because someone else was playing now. And I was going to find out who. I held the note in my hands, my fingers tracing the edges of the paper as my mind raced. "Check your tea tomorrow morning." The words were simple, yet they carried weight. Someone else was playing now. Someone who knew enough to insert themselves into the unfolding chaos. I wasn't sure what unsettled me more. The fact that I wasn't the only one orchestrating this silent war, or the lingering question of who had written the note. My mother-in-law? Unlikely. She thrived on direct confrontation, her insults sharp as a blade. My sister-in-law? Perhaps. But this wasn't her style. She was unraveling, but she wasn't cunning. Not like this. That left one possibility. I turned my gaze toward the closed bedroom door. My husband. A slow exhale left my lips. For years I had learned to live with his silence. The way he let his family tear into me without so much as a word. The way he turned his head when I was humiliated, when I was treated like an outsider in my own home. And yet, something about his gaze last night, the way he had watched me at the dinner table, the flicker of something behind his eyes, had stuck with me. Could it be him? I placed the note on the nightstand, turning off the lamp. Sleep didn't come easily, not with the weight of anticipation pressing against my ribs. My mind spun through the possibilities, threading together loose ends, but the answer remained elusive. Morning arrived with an eerie sense of calm. I followed my usual routine, making my way to the kitchen as though nothing had changed. My mother-in-law was already seated, sipping her tea with her usual air of self-importance. My sister-in-law sat across from her, avoiding my gaze. The cup of tea in front of her remained untouched. And then there was my husband. He stood near the counter, pretending to be busy with his phone. I could feel his attention even without looking at him directly. Keeping my movements measured, I reached for my cup. My fingers wrapped around the handle, lifting it slowly. The tea was as it always was, warm, fragrant, harmless. But that was the problem. It was too normal. If this were any other day, I wouldn't have thought twice. But today, after the note, there was something here. Something unseen. I set the cup down deliberately as though savoring the moment. My mother-in-law arched an eyebrow. "Not drinking." I smiled. "I will." And then, before anyone could react, I turned the cup ever so slightly. just enough to spill a few drops onto the white tablecloth. The liquid pooled, seeping into the fabric. Silence. It lasted no more than a second, but in that second I caught the shift. My husband's fingers twitched ever so slightly. My sister-in-law inhaled sharply, then masked it with a cough. My mother-in-law remained unaffected, but I had never expected her to react. She wasn't the one playing the game. But someone here was. Casually I reached for a napkin, dabbing at the spill. Clumsy of me, I murmured. No one spoke. And that was all the confirmation I needed. The tea had been tampered with. Question was, how? And more importantly, why? My mind moved quickly, piecing things together. My husband had been distant lately, but not in the usual way. It wasn't just disinterest anymore. It was something else. Calculating. My sister-in-law had been erratic, her paranoia growing with each passing day. But would she really have the nerve to go this far? I glanced at my husband again, watching as he scrolled absently through his phone, though his thumb wasn't moving. Was this his attempt at taking control? A warning? A test? I decided to push. I reached for the cup again, lifting it toward my lips, watching him from the corner of my eye. The reaction was immediate. His shoulders tensed, his eyes flicking toward me for the briefest second before shifting away. There was that flicker of something beneath his carefully composed expression. I set the cup down without drinking, my fingers curling around the handle. Game on. The rest of breakfast passed in silence, but beneath it, a storm brewed. My sister-in-law still refused to drink her tea, her fingers drumming against the table, a nervous habit I had never noticed before. My mother-in-law continued as though nothing was amiss, but she was watching. Always watching. And my husband? He remained quiet. Too quiet. When the table was cleared and the dishes washed, I found myself alone in the kitchen. Or so I thought. You knew, didn't you? The voice was low, controlled. I turned, finding my husband standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I tilted my head slightly. Knew what? His jaw tightened. Don't play games with me. I held his gaze, letting the silence stretch. Then I smiled. You were testing me. His lips parted, then pressed into a thin line. He didn't deny it. I took a slow step forward. Why? He exhaled through his nose, running a hand through his hair. For the first time in a long time, there was something real in his expression. A flicker of uncertainty. You've changed, he said finally. I let out a quiet laugh. You're just now noticing? His eyes darkened. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. So tell me, husband, I murmured, what exactly was in my tea this morning? He hesitated. And that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. There hadn't been anything in the tea. Not poison. Not anything dangerous. Just doubt. He had planted the seed just as I had done with my sister-in-law. He wanted to see if I would drink it. If I would hesitate. If I would flinch. I hadn't. I reached out, brushing my fingers against his arm. You're trying to understand me, I mused, tilting my head. But here's the thing. He swallowed. I don't think you ever really knew me at all. His breath caught for just a second. And then I walked past him, leaving him standing there, drowning in the realization. I didn't need to test him, as I had already won. But there was still one more move to make. One final sip to take. And I would make sure they all watched. I walked away from my husband, leaving him standing in the dimly lit hallway with nothing but his own thoughts. He wanted to understand me now, but it was too late for that. For years he had allowed his family to tear me down, picking at my existence like vultures circling prey. And now, only when the scales had shifted, did he start to look at me differently. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into this house all those years ago, desperate for approval, for a place to belong. That woman had been fragile, easily dismissed. This woman, she was something else entirely. And they were just beginning to realize it. Morning came heavy with unspoken tension. The house carried a stillness, an unnatural quiet that pressed against the walls like an impending storm. I moved through my routine as if nothing had changed, but I could feel the weight of their gazes, watching, waiting. My sister-in-law lingered near the doorway, pretending to check her phone, but her eyes flickered toward me every few seconds. My mother-in-law sat at the dining table, her usual mask of indifference in place, but there was a stiffness in her shoulders. And my husband? He was already seated, staring at the cup of tea set before him. I took my seat, my fingers tracing the rim of my own cup. The air felt thick, like something unspoken was crawling between us, unseen but undeniable. I could sense the hesitation, the wariness in their movements. Good. They were exactly where I wanted them. With deliberate slowness, I lifted my cup, letting the steam curl into the air. I felt them watching, waiting for me to hesitate, to show some flicker of uncertainty. But I didn't. Instead, I brought the cup to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. The silence was deafening. I set the cup down gently, the sound of porcelain against wood almost deafening in the heavy quiet. Then I exhaled, a soft, satisfied sound, as if the tea tasted no different than any other morning. As it didn't. I had known from the moment I lifted the cup. The temperature, the scent, it was exactly as it always had been. No bitterness, no unusual taste. Nothing had been done to my tea. But they didn't know that. And that was the real game. My sister-in-law shifted in her seat, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. My mother-in-law's expression remained carefully neutral, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. And my husband, oh, he was the most telling of all. His knuckles were white against the table, his jaw tight. I tilted my head slightly. Something wrong. His eyes flicked to mine, and in that second I saw it. Doubt. For the first time he was the one questioning everything. Not me. Not the power structure of this house that had remained unchallenged for years. No, this time it was them who were off balance. And I was the one pulling the strings. I reached for the sugar bowl, stirring a small spoonful into my tea with practiced ease. You're all so quiet this morning, I mused, watching the liquid swirl, golden and warm. It's unusual. No one responded. The silence stretched, tense and suffocating. Then finally my sister-in-law broke. You drank it. Her voice was barely above a whisper, laced with something almost like disbelief. I arched a brow. Of course I did. Why wouldn't I? Her throat bobbed as she swallowed, her fingers tapping restlessly against the table. My mother-in-law, ever composed, leaned back in her chair. No reason. But her voice was too careful, too measured. They had expected me to hesitate, to falter. I had done neither. I took another sip, slower this time, watching them from the corner of my eye. You all seem tense, I commented, setting the cup down again. My husband exhaled, long and slow. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Enjoying what? His jaw clenched. I let the silence sit between us, stretching out like a taut wire. Then with a soft chuckle I leaned forward slightly. What exactly did you think would happen? No answer. Because they didn't know. They had all expected something, anything, to happen the moment I drank from that cup. Maybe they thought I would hesitate, or worse, that I would accuse them of something. But I hadn't. I had taken a sip without a second thought. And that, more than anything, had shaken them. My sister-in-law suddenly pushed her chair back, the legs scraping against the floor as she stood. I'm going to my room. She practically fled. I watched her go, a quiet satisfaction settling in my chest. He was cracking. I had planted the seed of doubt, and it was growing, curling around her thoughts like ivy. She wouldn't last much longer. My mother-in-law, to her credit, remained unmoved. You should eat, she said coolly, as if the entire exchange had never happened. But I could see it. The way she avoided looking at me directly. The way her fingers tightened around the handle of her own cup. She was beginning to doubt herself, too. Good. I picked up a piece of toast, taking a slow bite. Delicious, I murmured, watching my husband out of the corner of my eye. His shoulders were rigid, his face unreadable. But I knew him too well. I had shaken something in him, cracked whatever foundation he had built inside his own mind. I was no longer the weak one in this house. And that terrified him. Finishing my tea, I pushed my chair back, standing slowly. Well, I sighed, this was lovely. No one responded. I walked away, leaving them to sit in their own thoughts, their own suspicions. I had won this round. But the game wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. As I left the dining room, I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against a small slip of paper. The note I had found under my pillow the night before. I had checked my tea just as it had instructed. No. Now it was time to find out who had written it. As I walked away from the dining table, the small note still tucked inside my pocket, my mind churned with possibilities. The weight of it against my fingers was heavier than it should have been, as if the words carried something far more significant than a simple warning. Someone had gone out of their way to reach me. But why? And more importantly, who? The quiet creak of the hallway floor beneath my steps was the only sound as I made my way back to the bedroom. My pulse was steady, controlled, but my thoughts raced ahead of me, analyzing every movement, every glance, every hesitation from breakfast. I had learned to read people in this house. It had been a matter of survival. And right now my instincts told me something was shifting. I shut the bedroom door behind me, leaning against it for just a moment. The silence here was different. It wasn't comforting. It was thick with anticipation, with the promise of something waiting to be uncovered. I pulled the note from my pocket, unfolding it carefully. The words stared back at me, simple yet powerful. Check your tea tomorrow morning. Who had written it? It hadn't been my sister-in-law. Her fear was too raw, too reactionary. My mother-in-law? Unlikely. She wielded her cruelty openly, never through whispers in the dark. That left only one real possibility. I turned my head toward the bathroom door where I knew my husband would be. The sound of running water hummed through the space, filling the air with soft static. If he had left the note, what was his endgame? Was it a warning? A test? Or something else entirely? I needed answers. The water stopped, and a moment later the door swung open. My husband stepped out, a towel draped around his neck, droplets of water sliding down his collarbone. He looked up, and for a split second there was something in his gaze. Something unreadable. I held up the note. Did you write this? His expression didn't change, but there was the briefest pause, a flicker of something behind his eyes before he spoke. No. Why? A carefully measured, practiced lie. I stepped closer, watching his reaction. Someone in this house did. He didn't flinch, but I saw the shift in his posture. The slight tension in his shoulders. The way his fingers curled into his towel just for a moment before relaxing. You think it was me? His voice was calm, neutral, but I heard the undercurrent of something else. Something darker. I think, I said slowly, stepping even closer, that you've been watching me. His lips parted slightly, but he didn't deny it. I tilted my head, studying him the way I had studied my in-laws for years. Reading between the lines of what wasn't being said. You wanted to see if I'd drink the tea. That's why you put the note there. You wanted to test me. His silence was the only answer I needed. I exhaled, tucking the note back into my pocket. You were waiting for something to happen, I continued, voice quiet but sharp. You wanted to see if I'd hesitate. If I'd react. He crossed his arms, finally speaking. And you didn't. A smile tugged at the corner of my lips, but it wasn't amusement. No. His gaze was searching now, analyzing me the way I had just done to him. You've changed. You've said that before, I murmured. Because it's true. I let the silence stretch, watching him shift under the weight of it. Then I spoke the words that had been circling my mind since I first found the note. Why do you care? He inhaled slowly, running a hand through his damp hair. Because I don't know what's going to happen next. I raised an eyebrow. And that bothers you? For the first time his carefully constructed composure cracked. It shouldn't it? There was the truth, buried beneath his restraint. He had spent years being indifferent to me, to the way his family treated me. But now, when the power in this house had shifted, when I was the one in control, he finally started paying attention. I stepped even closer, lowering my voice. Are you afraid of me, husband? He didn't answer. But he didn't have to. I reached for the doorknob, pausing just before stepping out. If you leave another note, I murmured, make sure you ask the right question. Then I walked away, leaving him standing there, his uncertainty thick enough to taste in the air. Downstairs the house was quiet, but I knew it wouldn't last. My sister-in-law was unraveling, my mother-in-law was watching, and my husband was questioning everything he thought he knew. Me. I was done playing their game. I was making my own rules now. I found my way to the kitchen, the morning sun casting long shadows across the floor. My hands moved on autopilot, preparing another cup of tea, the motions familiar, practiced. But this time there was no note waiting beneath my cup. I lifted the tea, watching the steam curl into the air. I had control now. Of myself. Of this house. Of them. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Because they had spent years believing I was weak. That I would always be beneath them. That I would never be the one holding the power. But now I had it. And I wasn't letting it go. I took a slow sip, savoring the warmth. Let them wonder. Let them fear. Because this wasn't just about tea anymore. This was war. And I had already won. I sat at the kitchen table, my tea cradled between my hands, its warmth pressing against my palms. The steam curled lazily into the air, swirling like the thoughts racing through my mind. The house was silent now, but it wasn't the kind of peaceful silence that came with comfort. It was the heavy kind. The waiting kind. The kind that stretched tight over everything, ready to snap at the slightest pressure. The balance had shifted. I had felt it the moment I walked away from my husband, leaving him standing in his own uncertainty. He was afraid, though he wouldn't admit it. Not of me necessarily, but of what I had become. Of the fact that for the first time he wasn't sure what I would do next. And that terrified him. Good. I lifted my cup and took a slow sip, watching the reflection of the window against the liquid surface. My mother-in-law had always believed she ran this house. She had dictated its rules, controlled its hierarchy, ensured that I always remained at the bottom. My sister-in-law had followed in her footsteps, their cruelty passed down like a family heirloom. My husband had stood on the sidelines, complicit in his silence. But that was over now. A soft creak echoed from the hallway, barely audible, but I caught it. A shift in weight, hesitant footsteps. Someone was watching me. I didn't react. Instead, I set my cup down with deliberate ease, my fingers curling against the porcelain's edge. "You might as well come in," I said, keeping my voice light. Silence. Then after a beat, my sister-in-law stepped into view. She looked different today. Not as put together as usual. Her normally sleek hair was slightly unkempt, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She hadn't been sleeping well. I knew that because I had made sure of it. She lingered by the doorway, arms crossed, but there was no fire in her posture. No sharp-edged confidence. "Why are you doing this?" Her voice was quieter than usual, lacking its usual bite. I tilted my head slightly, studying her. "Doing what?" She let out a sharp breath as if frustrated with the game. "This. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around her sleeves. "You're different." I leaned back in my chair, letting the statement settle. "Maybe I was always like this," I said simply. "Maybe you just never noticed." Her lips pressed together, but she didn't argue. Because deep down she knew I was right. She had spent years dismissing me, treating me as insignificant. She had never once considered that I might be capable of anything beyond enduring her taunts. And now, she was realizing that her ignorance had been her greatest mistake. I gestured to the empty chair across from me. "Sit." She hesitated but then did. For the first time, there was no smugness in her expression. No superiority. Just quiet, simmering uncertainty. I watched her waiting. And then softly she spoke. "Did you put something in the tea?" The words barely made it past her lips, but they hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I picked up my cup again, letting the warmth seep into my skin. "Would you believe me if I said no?" She swallowed, glancing at my cup then back at me. She didn't answer. And that told me everything I needed to know. I set my tea down once more, leaning forward slightly. "You're afraid?" She stiffened, her jaw tightening. "I'm not." I smiled. "Lying doesn't suit you." She flinched. Just barely. But I caught it. I could see it in her posture, the way she kept glancing at my cup as if expecting something to happen. She didn't know what was real anymore. That was the beauty of fear. It didn't have to be logical. It just had to exist. She was unraveling. And I wasn't done yet. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the note, the one I had found under my pillow, the one that had led me to this moment. I slid it across the table toward her. "Did you write this?" Her breath caught as she read the words. "Check your tea tomorrow morning." She looked up at me, genuine confusion flashing across her face. "No," she said, and for the first time I believed her. "Interesting." I leaned back. "Then who did?" She shook her head, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Something close to realization. "You don't think?" She stopped herself, shaking her head again. I narrowed my gaze. "What?" Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "It's just," she hesitated, her hands fisting against her lap. "It's probably nothing." I watched her carefully. "Say it." She exhaled shakily. "Last night before I went to bed I saw Mom." She stopped, correcting herself. "I saw her outside your room." I frowned. "And?" She shifted in her seat. She had something in her hand. A piece of paper. A slow, cold realization settled over me. My mother-in-law. The woman who had spent years making my life unbearable. The woman who never hesitated to insult, to manipulate, to control. The woman who had built this house into a kingdom where she ruled. And I was nothing more than a tolerated inconvenience. She had left the note. But why? My sister-in-law was watching me now, waiting for a reaction. She looked uneasy, as if saying it out loud had made it real. I let out a slow breath, steadying my thoughts. If she wrote the note, I said carefully, then that means she wanted me to check the tea. The implication was obvious. She wanted me to know something was off. I glanced down at my cup, my mind working through the possibilities. Had she expected me to hesitate? To panic? Had she been testing me just as my husband had? Or had she been warning me? I looked up, meeting my sister-in-law's gaze. Where is she now? She swallowed, then glanced toward the hallway. Upstairs. In her room. I nodded slowly, pushing my chair back. The storm was breaking, and I was walking straight into it. I moved toward the stairs, my pulse steady but my mind brimming with questions. My mother-in-law had written the note. That much was clear now. But the real question remained. Why? Was she warning me? Testing me? Or was this just another one of her elaborate power plays? A last-ditch effort to reclaim control over a house she no longer ruled? I climbed each step deliberately, my fingers trailing along the wooden railing. The walls of this house had always seemed to whisper, carrying secrets through the hallways like unseen ghosts. But now, for the first time, I was the one in control of the story. As I reached the second floor, the air grew heavier, thick with unspoken words. I could feel it pressing against me, like the house itself was holding its breath. My mother-in-law's door was slightly ajar, just enough to suggest an invitation. Or a trap. I stepped inside. She was seated near the window, her posture unnaturally still. A cup of tea rested on the small table beside her, untouched. The moment she heard me, she turned her head slightly, her sharp eyes locking onto mine. You figured it out, she said simply, her voice as smooth as ever. I didn't respond right away. I took a slow step forward, watching her, reading her. She wasn't nervous. If anything, she looked expectant, as if she had been waiting for this moment. You left the note, I said, keeping my voice measured. Her lips curled into a slight smirk. Of course I did. I inhaled, slow and deep, pushing past the irritation that rose in my chest. She was enjoying this. The dance, the game, the tension stretched between us like a wire ready to snap. But I wouldn't let her dictate the pace. Why? I asked. Her smirk didn't falter. Because I needed to know. I narrowed my gaze. Know what? She reached for her cup, swirling the liquid inside without drinking. I needed to know if you had it in you. A slow chill traced its way down my spine, but I didn't let it show. Had what in me? She tilted her head slightly, as if observing a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. The ability to survive. I let out a quiet laugh, devoid of humor. Survive what? She set the cup down and leaned forward just slightly. This house. I watched her carefully, my mind working through her words. Was this some sort of admission? A twisted acknowledgement of the years of torment she had orchestrated? You underestimated me, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Her expression didn't change. No, she murmured. I watched. I waited. And then I tested. The weight of her words settled over me, a realization clicking into place. This hadn't just been cruelty. This had been a deliberate, calculated process. You wanted me to fight back, I murmured, more to myself than to her. Her smirk deepened. I wanted to see if you would. My fingers curled at my sides. And if I hadn't? She leaned back, her gaze unwavering. Then you never would have belonged here. A slow, creeping anger stirred beneath my ribs, but it was laced with something else. Understanding. She had never wanted a daughter-in-law to mold into obedience. She had wanted an opponent. Someone to challenge her, to prove their worth in the only way she respected, through power. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. You're insane. She chuckled, the sound low and knowing. And yet here you are. Standing. Stronger than ever. I took another step closer, my voice steady. You don't control me anymore. She inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the truth in my words. But there was something else in her expression. Something unreadable. You think you've won, she mused. I met her gaze head on. I know I have. A beat of silence stretched between us. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, she lifted her cup and took a sip. My breath caught for just a fraction of a second, because I knew in that moment something was wrong. She set the cup down gently, her fingers resting lightly on the porcelain. "I always knew you'd be the one to take my place," she murmured. A slow, creeping unease curled through me. "What did you do?" She smiled then, a quiet, knowing expression. "I made sure you'd remember this moment." My heart pounded. And then before I could react, she closed her eyes. The cup slipped from her fingers, tipping over, the tea spilling across the table in a slow, golden cascade. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay still, to think. I stepped forward quickly, shaking her shoulder. "What did you do?" Her body slumped slightly, but her lips were still curved in that eerie smile. My breath came sharp and fast, my mind racing. Was this real? Was this another trick? I turned toward the door, ready to call for help, but then I stopped. As I saw it, a small slip of paper tucked beneath the edge of the table. With shaking fingers, I pulled it free. One sentence. One final message. "Check my tea tomorrow morning." The room spun. I staggered back, the weight of it pressing down on me. This wasn't over. Not yet. Not by a long shot. The note trembled between my fingers as the room around me shrank into silence. "Check my tea tomorrow morning." The words were simple, yet they pulsed with something deeper. Something calculated, deliberate. My mother-in-law had planned this, right down to the moment her fingers loosened from the teacup, right down to the way her body slumped forward, as if she had orchestrated even her own downfall. But was this real? I forced myself to move, kneeling beside her motionless form, pressing 2 fingers to the side of her neck. A pulse. Faint but steady. She was still here. Still breathing. But unconscious. And that meant one thing. This wasn't an accident. This was a performance. I looked at the spilled tea, the liquid soaking into the wood of the table, curling around the porcelain like an offering. Had she done something to it? Or had she merely wanted me to think she had? The line between manipulation and reality blurred in this house, twisted into knots by years of deception and control. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, hurried and uneven. My sister-in-law. She appeared at the door, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. What happened?" Her voice was breathless, laced with alarm, but her fingers clenched at the fabric of her sleeves. A nervous habit, a tell. I met her gaze, my own steady. She collapsed. Her lips parted, then closed. She didn't move closer. I rose slowly, the note still in my hand. "She left this for me." Her gaze flickered to the paper, then back to my mother-in-law's still form. "What does it mean?" I exhaled, rolling my shoulders, keeping my voice even. "I think she wanted me to see what she was willing to do." The words settled between us, heavy with implication. The air in the room felt charged, as if every unspoken word over the years had finally gathered here, filling the space between us. My sister-in-law swallowed, her throat bobbing. "You don't think she—" "I don't know," I cut in. "But I intend to find out." The next morning arrived like a whisper, quiet and unsettling. The house held its breath, waiting. I descended the stairs, my steps slow and deliberate, my thoughts weaving through every possible scenario. My mother-in-law was still unconscious when the paramedics had arrived last night. My husband had barely spoken, his expression unreadable as they carried her out. But now she was back. Back in her house. Back in her throne. And I had to face her. The dining room was almost eerily perfect. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting golden light over the pristine table. My mother-in-law sat in her usual chair, looking as composed as ever, as if nothing had happened. The only sign that anything was different was the slight pallor to her skin, the subtle weakness in the way her fingers curled around her cup. I took my seat across from her, feeling the weight of my husband's gaze from the other end of the table. My sister-in-law sat stiffly beside him, her eyes darting between us, waiting. Then the moment of reckoning arrived. My mother-in-law lifted her teacup, her fingers steady despite everything. She brought it to her lips, took a slow sip, then set it down with deliberate care. The silence stretched. Then she smiled. "Well," she murmured, her voice smooth as if we were discussing the weather. I didn't blink. "Well, what?" Her smile deepened. "Aren't you going to check my tea?" A slow, deliberate chill crawled down my spine, but I kept my expression unreadable. This was her game, her final move. And now it was up to me to decide how I played it. I reached for her cup. My husband inhaled sharply. My sister-in-law stiffened. But my mother-in-law? She simply watched. I lifted the cup, turning it slightly, observing the tea inside. No visible difference. No unusual scent. Nothing that would indicate a hidden ingredient. But that wasn't the point, was it? This wasn't about the tea. This was about control. I set the cup down gently, my fingers tracing the rim before meeting her gaze. No, I said softly. Her eyebrow arched. No. I leaned forward slightly, my voice unwavering. I don't need to check it. Her expression didn't falter, but I caught it. The slight flicker of something behind her eyes. Approval? Amusement? Perhaps both. You're certain? She pressed. I smiled then, slow and knowing. I know you. Her fingers tapped lightly against the table. And? I exhaled, tilting my head slightly. And I know you'd never give up your crown so easily. Pause. Then something remarkable happened. She laughed. Not a small chuckle, not a sharp scoff, but a full, rich laugh that filled the room, startling my husband and sister-in-law into silence. It was a laugh of understanding. Of recognition. Of surrender, not in defeat but in respect. She wiped at the corner of her eye, still smirking. Oh, you are something. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She picked up her cup once more, taking another sip. You know, she mused, I spent years wondering if you'd make it. I held her gaze. And now? She set the cup down, folding her hands over the table. And now I know you have. The air between us had shifted, something silent but irreversible passing between us. She had spent years trying to break me. But now she saw me for what I was. Not just a survivor. Not just her equal. But something more. I stood slowly, my movements careful and deliberate. Enjoy your tea, I murmured, then turned and walked away. I didn't need to look back to know she was watching. Because for the first time since I had entered this house, I wasn't just a daughter-in-law. I was a queen in my own right. And I had just claimed my throne. I walked away from the table, my footsteps slow, deliberate. My mother-in-law's laughter still echoed in my mind, a sound that should have unsettled me but instead confirmed what I already knew. I had won. But victory in this house didn't come with celebrations. It came with weight. A shift in power that settled over my shoulders like an invisible cloak, one I had unknowingly tailored over the years. I reached the hallway, pausing for a moment to glance back. My husband sat stiffly at the head of the table, his hands gripping the edges as though steadying himself. My sister-in-law, still trapped in the confusion of what had just happened, looked lost, her eyes darting between me and their mother. And my mother-in-law? She sipped her tea. Unbothered. Unrushed. But I knew better now. She wasn't drinking because she was comfortable. She was drinking because she had seen the inevitable. The moment she had spent years fighting against had arrived, and instead of resisting, she had welcomed it. I turned away and continued walking. My room was as I had left it. Tidy, controlled, absent of the chaos that had gripped the rest of the house. But it wasn't a sanctuary. Not really. I had made a decision back at that table, one that couldn't be undone. There was no more pretending. No more waiting for someone else to take the lead. I had taken the throne. And now I had to rule. I sank into the chair near the window, rubbing slow circles against my temple as I let my mind process everything. The tea, the notes, the games, all of it had been leading to this. My mother-in-law had pushed me, tested me, and now she had given me something unexpected. Respect. I wasn't naive enough to think this was the end. No, this was merely the beginning of something new. She hadn't surrendered. Women like her never did. But she had acknowledged that I wasn't to be dismissed. That I had played her game and survived. A knock on my door snapped me from my thoughts. I turned my head slightly. Come in. The door opened hesitantly and my husband stepped inside. His face was unreadable but his posture was tight, restrained. He closed the door behind him but he didn't move closer. I waited. Finally he spoke. What just happened? I exhaled slowly. You tell me. His jaw clenched. She laughed. Like it was all some kind of joke. I leaned back, tilting my head slightly. Wasn't it? His eyes flickered with something. Frustration? Uncertainty? I wasn't sure. You're different, he murmured. I smiled, slow and knowing. You've said that before. His fingers curled at his sides. Because I mean it. I studied him, the way he shifted his weight, the way his breathing was just a little too controlled. He wasn't just confused, he was uncomfortable. The balance had changed and he was struggling to adjust. You thought she'd fight me, I said softly. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. You thought she'd refuse to let go, I continued, voice steady. That she'd keep pushing, keep controlling. His gaze dropped for just a second before meeting mine again. She never loses. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping into something softer, something sharper. Maybe she didn't. His breath hitched. As he knew I was right. This wasn't a loss for her. This was a handover. A transition of power disguised as a final test. And the truth was, he wasn't sure where he fit in anymore. I stood slowly, crossing the room until I was just a few inches from him. Does that scare you? His jaw tensed, his eyes searching mine. I don't know, he admitted. I smiled, lifting a hand to brush my fingers against his chest, not in affection but in silent reassurance. You'll figure it out. A beat of silence. Then I stepped back. He lingered for a moment longer as if considering saying something else, but then he simply turned and left, closing the door behind him. I let out a slow breath. I had secured my place in this house, but that didn't mean the war was over. It just meant the battlefield had changed. The next morning, breakfast was different. Not in the food, not in the setting, but in the air itself. My mother-in-law sat in her usual chair, regal as ever, but there was something else now. Something subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniably present. She no longer looked at me as if I were beneath her. My sister-in-law barely spoke, her eyes darting toward her mother as if waiting for her to snap, to reclaim control. But she didn't. And my husband, he was watching everything. Quiet. Calculating. When I lifted my cup of tea, I did so with slow, deliberate ease. Then I took a sip, never breaking eye contact with my mother-in-law. She smiled. And lifted her own cup. The clink of porcelain against wood was the only sound in the room. For the first time in years, we weren't adversaries. We were equals. And everyone else at the table? They were just trying to keep up. I set my cup down gently, wiping my lips with the napkin before speaking. Lovely tea this morning. My mother-in-law's smirk was barely there. I thought you'd like it. I let the silence stretch, the power shift settling into place. I had won. But I wasn't foolish enough to think this was the end. Because queens didn't rule in peace. They ruled in strategy. And in this house the game never truly ended. The tea had settled between us like an unspoken pact. The delicate clink of porcelain on wood, a subtle acknowledgement of the shift that had taken place. My mother-in-law no longer regarded me as an inconvenience. My sister-in-law barely dared to look in my direction, and my husband, he watched with the quiet calculation of a man trying to understand his place in a new world order. But something still felt unfinished. The battle had been fought, the throne secured, yet the air in the house carried an uneasy stillness. As if something or someone was still waiting to make their move. I didn't let my guard down. Not yet. After breakfast, I lingered in the dining room, my fingers tracing the rim of my cup, lost in thought. The tension had settled, but I knew better than to mistake that for peace. My mother-in-law had tested me, pushed me to the brink, only to welcome me into the power she once held. But women like her didn't just relinquish control. They evolved, adapted, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. A shadow moved in my periphery. I glanced up just as my husband approached, his expression unreadable. He waited until the others had left before speaking. You handled her. It wasn't a question. It was an observation. A quiet admission. I tilted my head, offering a slow smile. Did I? His eyes narrowed slightly, but not in anger. In something closer to curiosity. She respects you now. I took a slow sip of my tea, savoring the warmth before setting the cup down. She always did. She just needed to be sure. His jaw clenched, and for the first time in a long time he hesitated before speaking. And me? I raised an eyebrow. What about you? His fingers tapped against the chair, a nervous tick I had come to recognize. Where do I fit in now? I exhaled softly, leaning back in my seat. That's up to you. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words. He wasn't asking about his place in the family. He was asking about his place with me. The dynamic had shifted, and for the first time he wasn't standing in his mother's shadow, protected by the role of the indifferent husband. Now he was standing before a woman who no longer needed him to navigate this house. A woman who had found her own footing. And that unsettled him. I pushed my chair back and stood, smoothing out the fabric of my blouse. If you're waiting for me to tell you what to do next, you'll be waiting a long time. His eyes flickered with something unreadable. You don't need me anymore. I smiled, slow and knowing. I never did. I left him sitting there, the weight of my words settling over him like a verdict. The house had been built around control. Around alliances and unspoken hierarchies. And for years I had been at the bottom, scraping for a sense of belonging, waiting for permission to exist. But now there was no one left to grant me that permission. I had taken it, and there was no going back. That night the house felt different. The walls weren't whispering with tension. There were no lingering glances, no hidden power struggles. Everything had settled. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still coming. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the clock. My husband was beside me, but his breathing was still too even, too controlled. He wasn't sleeping. Neither was I. You're thinking, he murmured into the darkness. I turned my head slightly. And you're awake. Pause. Then, is this what you wanted? I let out a soft breath, turning onto my side to face him. I wanted to survive. His eyes searched mine, looking for something I wasn't sure I could give him. And now, he asked. I studied him in the dim light. The man who had once been a stranger in my own home. The man who had let his mother dictate the rules while I played the role I had been expected to play. But he wasn't her. And for the first time I realized that maybe he never had been. Now, I murmured, I want to live. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, his fingers twitching slightly against the sheets. With me. I didn't answer right away. Because that was the final move, wasn't it? The last piece to be placed on the board. The decision that, for once, was entirely mine. I reached out, brushing my fingers over his wrist, feeling the slow, steady pulse beneath his skin. That depends, I whispered. His voice was quiet, barely audible in the stillness. On what? I leaned in, my lips close enough to feel his breath. On whether or not you're strong enough to stand beside me. The challenge was silent but understood. I had secured my place in this house. But I wouldn't drag him with me. If he wanted to be part of this new order, he would have to choose it for himself. The house was mine now. The power mine. The control mine. And if he wanted to stay, he had to prove he was worthy of being in my world. He exhaled slowly, the weight of my words sinking in. Then finally he nodded. Not in submission, but in understanding. And for the first time we weren't just playing a game. We were building something new. Together. Or not at all.